Howdy! Hello, Annan. Today we're going to talk about esoteric racism. Just kidding. Esoteric races. So, you can probably see by this picture here. I've got this nice lady there, Madame Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society. And we have these orbs that have been colored for us. And behind the first one, we have Polaris, second Hyperborean, third Lemurian, fourth Atlantean, and the fifth race, the Aryan race. And I want to just put that there to contrast with, maybe I can, let me just find something on my computer real quick. Oh god, I should have done this before recording. How do I save? Yes. No? No? Oh god, what have I done? There we go. Wait for it. Wait for it. Just a second, guys. I got this. Okay. I want to contrast this Madame Blavatsky picture with another picture I saw pop up online. Boom. Let me enlarge that for you. Doctor, quickly enhance. That's right. So, we got this picture here. What does it say? Aldebaran, Hyperborea, Atlantis, Pontic Caspian Steppe, and Fortnite Island. So you might look at that and be like, what? And what does this have to do with esoteric races? So, to give a quick rundown of that previous picture, that idea comes from, Madame Blavatsky, the Theosophical Society, and it's elaborated by. Sometimes it gets taken and absorbed into the Western esoteric current. So a lot of Rosicrucian schools eventually, at least, took parts of that. I mean, Steiner was a bit of a fan. Max Heindel, I think. Dion Fortune also was fond of Theosophy and such. But I mean, even Gurdjieff talks about Lemuria and Atlantis and whatnot, even though he may not name them specifically. Or Gurdjie, but nonetheless. So the idea with that, those races is to give a completely different perspective on humanity. So we have the normal perspective, which is the scientific perspective, the evolution. Man, started out as a hominid, and then eventually evolved, and out of Africa, and then Africans mutated into Asians, and then Asians mutated into white people. That's the main shtick nowadays, right? So Madame Blavatsky had this really, really, really esoteric view of the creation of man. So the idea is once again, you have to understand her cosmology, that a planet is a kind of an engine that develops essences. So essences that come into creation are very basic, and they start off in the mineral kingdom, just living through the earth. And then eventually, when they develop enough, they move to the vegetable kingdom, and they individuate. So you get trees and bushes and groves with their own elemental spirits, and then these spirits eventually individuate further and become animal bodies. But from there's a leap that takes place. There needs to be something else, so humanity needs to be created, but the origin of humanity isn't ground up. It's actually divine down. So her idea was that man was this super divine being that was basically godlike. Like a god, basically, that just descended, and, we had indestructible bodies and could fly and could speak to nature and, magical powers, all the shiz. So that's basically what her concept of the polar race was. It's the reason why it's called the polar race is because it's so far off in the distant Earth that the ice poles were. The North Pole was actually an island of, what do you call it? A green, wonderful crystal island. So this polar race eventually degenerated and became the Hyperborean race. But there's some little shtick, because the whole thing about a race is, to her perspective, is it's just everybody on the planet is that race. So I mentioned, right at the end, that fifth sphere is called the Aryan race. But to Madame Blavatsky, just everybody living on the Earth would have been an Aryan. So it's like an Asian person would have been an Aryan. A black person would have been an Aryan. The idea is that you could say the Nazis, an Austrian painter, when he took this idea, he basically said the German people, they are more Aryan than others, so that's how it kind of came to be. But there's this idea that there's this divine race. And so the thing is, though, in Hyperborea there's a kind of a disconnection, because it said that the polar race had black skin, but then there's this other thing of how, like, or maybe translucent, or maybe blue skin even, Krishna. Very interesting correspondences. But maybe there's also talk of interstellar travel, or like there's this thing that beings that have a superior magical power can do. They can do something called the Great Leap, and they can move from planet to planet via the fourth dimension, if you want to go really crazy. But the idea is that there's two things. Either there was a planet that existed between Jupiter and Mars, and where that asteroid field is now, there was actually a planet, and there was a warlike race there that kind of destroyed the planet and then moved and migrated to Earth. And that's white people. Or that there was a group of people moved from Aldebaran to Earth. So there's two differing kind of, I don't know, what would you call them? There's two different origin stories for the white people. But these are the Hyperboreans, are the original white people. So they're actually offlanders. They don't belong. They're not natives of Earth. But then again, who's really a native? I mean, even the polar race, who had black skin, descended from heaven. So no one's an original Earthite, but nonetheless, the Hyperborean race was like the predominant race just on the planet then. It's said that the polar race, although they left and were reabsorbed into the bosom of nature, it's said that there is a secret city of people of the polar race who still have all of their powers intact, and they exist somewhere, like, under the earth crust or under the ocean or somewhere. I mean, they had indestructible bodies, so who knows where they act. Maybe they're inside the middle of a volcano or some crap. But it's said that there's a city of them on the earth somewhere, just like they're waiting. But nonetheless, so you have this first race, and this first race comes to an end, and the Hyperboreans move in. Whether they come from the star system of Aldebaran, or the star of Aldebaran, or they come from the planet that was destroyed in between Jupiter and Mars, is irrelevant. But there's this Hyperborea. There's this place after the polar race and before Lemuria. That's this, land of wonder and milk and honey. And they're similar to the polar race. They're not indestructible per se. They have to learn about pain and the human fragility. They can actually die. But, they can speak to nature. They can have faculties. They can see into the ultra, do magic, have all the magical powers and whatnot. But they then have their time in the sun, and their race wanes. It says they were destroyed by a catastrophe to do with tornadoes, which is somewhat symbolic. But after them is the Lemurians, who maybe you could say some polar race people who survived but were not part of that sacred city, who kind of spread around the earth. Eventually they began to, it's all about descending. They began to descend further into the earth, further, and condense. You see, one of the things that made the polar race semi-indestructible was the fact that they were, they're semi-etheric. The word ether, or the vital force that's used in ritual magic, comes from that idea. So this polar race condenses. Maybe I should just bring that image back up, just so I can, you can remember what I'm talking about. Here we go. Oh no, it's too big. It's too big. Stop it. Stop it. You're too big. Okay, so let me stand over here. So we have this polar race. They kind of peace out or go to a secret city. Hyperboreans survive and they peace out. And it says they go to the north, and they survive in the north for eons and eons. So all through the Lemuria race, they're still pure-blood Hyperboreans. They're just in the north. Whereas the Lemurian race then have their time in... And it said Lemuria was in the Pacific Ocean. You know how, like, Atlantis is supposed to be in the Atlantic Ocean? Actually, there's the island of Atlantis right there. Just if you can kind of see it in between... Just on the little picture there, in between, Africa and South America, you can see this like white island. But in the Pacific Ocean was supposed to be the continent of Lemuria, or Mu, where the Lemurians lived. And so that, they had their time in the sun, and that's actually where you could say the original fall was. All Lemurians were originally hermaphrodites. They had both female and male genitalias. And it's the splitting of the gender happened in their race, and they also became fully physical, and they still had a lot of powers, but it's said that there was a great tragedy. And Gurdjieff talks about this in his book Beelzebub's Tales to his Grandson, and he talks about this great tragedy that happened in Lemuria, and it's in Lemuria that you could say the ego crystallized or began. And so before then there was no, what would you call it? There's no ego. Obviously people still had individuality, but there was no like large scale negativity. There was no disgusting atheism or ultra ambitious pride or megalomania or things like that just didn't exist. There were no narcissists, there was no paranoia, no one had anxiety. It was paradisical. But the Lemurians ruined it for everybody. And so, but after their race, they died via huge earthquakes. So earthquakes sunk the continent of Mu, and all the Lemurians died, or a lot of them died. Some of them survived. And it said the ones that survived were living in North America. And this is where you have the start of the Atlantean race. So the beginning of the Atlantean race, and this is something you need to understand, were remnants of Lemuria. So they were also dark-skinned. So the first race of Atlantis was dark-skinned, and that pretty much continued for the next one. And the one after that, they have names for the first, each race has its own sub-races, I should say. And the first sub-race of Atlantis was something like the Romuajos, and then the next one after that were called the Tlavatli, and then the third sub-race, I believe, was called the Toltec. They were called the Toltecs. So these Toltecs were still, and they said they were the great builders, and they were the ones who created most of the great cities, like the city of Golden Gates were actually built by the Toltecs. But there's always crossbreeding and interbreeding between different races and whatnot that go throughout these certain things. So the fourth sub-race were called the Turanians. And Turania is kind of where the Middle East or where Arabia is. And it said that these Turanians were actually corrupted by black magicians that survived the Lemurian deluge. So this is like a very long extrapolation. And so they were the ones that kind of corrupted. And in Atlantis, after this point, there were not one, as Plato says, there's not one flood, but there were many floods and many destructions that happened of Atlantis. But the Turanians were always this consistent factor after that, like basically a civilization of black magicians that would then, all the other Atlanteans would try to fight. And so the Greek records is basically the Atlantean Greeks like fighting these Turanian Atlanteans. And so these were the evil Atlanteans who had strong mental powers and created monsters and would drink the blood of youth and it's said that they could milk the endocrine glands. They had the technology to milk the endocrine glands of the youth and extend their lives and things like this, and do all sorts of dark black magic rituals. But eventually, what happened is the Turanians kind of were so bad, there was a kind of a mini deluge, a flood to kind of kill them all out. And some of them repented, but they were so dark that they couldn't kind of go like, oh, what comes after this? Is this the Turanians will then go on to the next race? So it's said that the Cosmo creators or the masters who kind of governed Earth did is they basically got the Hyperboreans, who are still in the north, to come down and crossbreed with the Turanians. And they did this, once again, like Turanians, kind of Arabia, Hyperboreans come down from the north. This crossbreeding happened. And this is the modern race of, you could say, the white people, or all people who have, or who are Caucasian, I guess, whether you're Mediterranean or Celtic or Nordic or whatever, Baltic. Everyone descends from this mixture of people that came out of this crossbreed. And this happened between, you could say, the Black Sea and Kashmir. It's said, some esoteric authors had said the secret history, the secret origin of the white race lies between the Black Sea and Kashmir. So Kashmir being in North India, the Black Sea being, Black Sea and Caspian Sea are I wouldn't say they're relatively close, but they're it's around the steppe, around the Caucasus. So the Caucasus is where the term Caucasian comes from, and you Pontic steppe. I don't know, does that have something to do with the Pondians? I'm pretty sure it had something to do with the Pondians. You have people like Circassians. All of these names that I'm throwing out, these are names of groups of people who are a diaspora. They don't have a country anymore. You know, like how Jews were a diaspora for thousands of years, and now they have Israel. So there's other people like that. There's Circassians. There's no Circassia in the world. There's no country called Circassia. But there's a group of people called Circassians who just don't have a country. Isn't that crazy? It's hard to think of things like that nowadays because everything is, globalized, and what really makes a population, and everyone, there's no borders anymore and all that kind of stuff. It's very interesting. But so this kind of cross breed happened, and then this next sub-race of Atlantis, and then there was one after that, and then there was a final sub-race that ended in somewhere in the Far East, near Mongolia. It said Madame Blavatsky calls the final race of Atlantis the Mongolian race, but she talks about like this kind of mystical Mongolian race who could like talk to animals and stuff and had magical powers. So I mean, you kind of see that, like a remnant of that in modern day Mongolian society, with how they have they're very close with falcons and eagles and with their hunt and nomadic kind of people, so you can still kind of see that remnants of that there. But it's very interesting to kind of see this. So you have this idea, and then the next race is the Aryan race, which is then the humanity that we're in now, and they spread out. It said that they spread out from the top of the Atlantean, the full Atlantean flood happened, and the survivors dropped off in different places, like in America, in South Americas, in Egypt, pyramids, whatnot. In India, there was some remnants as well. But it said that the main brunt of the Atlanteans went to the roof of the world. And so Tibet is actually the origin of the Aryan race. And from there, it went downwards. So they went down east into China and India, and that's the kind of the hub of that ancient kind of, what would you call it, Aryan society. And then eventually it flowed westward. And I guess you can say in history you begin to have like the Persian empires, from the Median tribes, and then the Achaemenid, and you have these Scythian tribes and whatnot, and then you kind of get into the Mediterranean, and then you have it's kind of Central Europeans, and you have the waves of Celtic and then Nordic and then Slavic peoples coming in and interbreeding and overlaying over each other's genetics. It's very, very, very interesting. But this is where we kind of... So this is this idea from the Theosophical literature, which is then kind of bled into a lot of... Nowadays, obviously, they don't talk about it because this stuff is kind of touchy, but I just thought I'd brief that. This is what they used to say in esoteric kind of schools. And nowadays, we don't have this Madame Blavatsky picture. Let me bring the other one up. Well, nowadays, people still have that, but nowadays you see that stuff like this popping up. So this is clearly something that some guy did in MS Paint, and he's got Aldebaran. So what's that? That's, you could say, the original star system of the white people. Should also be noted as well, anyone who's into Vril or studying Vril or the Vril Society in Nazi Germany knows who Maria Orsic is. Maria Orsic is a very interesting figure. She was kind of a part of like the secret Nazi magical corps thing. But whenever people mention like Nazi UFOs, Maria Orsic is the one behind that. And she was either an alien or a psychic lady with magical powers, but she was never found after the war. After the war, she disappeared. And no one knows what happens to her, but in her very last letter correspondence to, I think, a German or to an admiral or a general or something, she's speaking, she says, yeah, blah, blah. The war is lost. I must go and rejoin the others in Aldebaran. And so it's like, ooh, what? So, it's the interesting idea. So we have this, so Aldebaran, that's perhaps where Maria Orsic went back to the original white people. Hyperborea, which was a time in the distant past, like before the fall of mankind, before the biblical fall. And then Atlantis, which, they're missing Lemuria in this, but I guess they're just tracking white people. And then there's the crossbreed of the Hyperboreans with the Atlanteans, which then you have the Pontic Caspian steppe, which is kind of like, the spreading of the spreading nowadays. Like all the geneticists and linguists kind of try and, the Indo-European language, they try and always bring it back to kind of this kind of tribal place. And now we have Fortnite Island, the original homeland of, I don't know, what would you call this? The modern white man-child? I don't know. But so this is supposed to be like the esoteric history of white people. I just thought, like, it's good to have sources. So look up a little bit of Steiner and his, like, Madame Blavatsky's hard to read. So what's better is to go Steiner, and a lot of his stuff has been transcribed, and there's like a Rudolf Steiner archive on YouTube nowadays. Go check them out, because they basically transcribed most of his books and his lectures, and you can probably just type in like Steiner Atlantis or Steiner subraces or something, and there should be some videos of someone like basically dictating, what Steiner said from a book or something. So you can check all of that stuff out, and that's, you could say, the esoteric history that was uncovered via the great occultists and clairvoyants. Madame Blavatsky had clairvoyance. Steiner was very good with clairvoyance. Should read his book, How to See Higher Worlds. Is How to Know Higher Worlds? Or Knowledge of Higher Worlds? God, terrible today. Anyway, just thought I'd brief that, just a quick one. That's, yeah. Let's just leave it there. Don't like and subscribe, I guess, but don't share this video. Don't report this video. Don't tell anyone about it. Don't tell anyone about what we talked here. It's secret. Okay. Bye.